We face division in every part of our lives, within ourselves, within our relationships, and in our work. But it doesn't have to be that way. To live fully, we must integrate all that God has made us to be with the work He has given us to do. This is MyBLVD's Integrate podcast, helping churches, nonprofits, and everyday Christians identify the divisions holding them back and giving them tools to make lasting change.
Welcome to MyBLVD's Integrate podcast, where we talk about the 7 core components of an integrated disciple making. I am here with my family, my friends, my loved ones. I am excited. Sho Baraka, what's up?
That is I am here. I am present.
Kenny Petty.
I'm here.
And Angie Lewis.
Hi.
This looks like the crew that's going to be on here consistently, for a variety of reasons. But this is us. This is us. We got the people that are the executors, the task-oriented folks. They are working, and
they remain in the room.
They remain in the room. They
stay.
remain.
Yeah.
So we just want you to know that this is a collaborative effort. Amisho, what are we talking about today?
Today on the Integrate podcast, we're going to be talking about some of the myths of discipleship. And those 4 myths are culture versus cult, one-on-one versus the church, discipleship is only a Bible study, and discipleship is optional.
Now, we're not saying this is all the myths. We're probably going to do a 2-part series on this, and it's still not going to cover all the myths of discipleship, but these are just some of the myths. These are some of the things that are prominent to us. I'm really excited about this one because, how can we be, an organization that is about helping the church to make disciples and creating tools for the church to make disciples where people live, work, and worship, and not talk about kind of the foundational myths that we think that people need to overcome. Kenny, you wrote a blog about this and, some stuff, around this. What are some of the things that even come up to you when you just talk about the myths of disciple making, and why is it even important to talk about myths of disciple making?
Well, because for one, sometimes this word we use today in our culture called deconstruct, and it's always not a bad thing. And sometimes we have to deconstruct ideas and what we thought. The only thing is we have to reconstruct the right ideas of what we're talking about. And when we're talking about discipleship, there are a plethora of things that have been written, that have been said. Some are generational, some are cultural, and you have a lot of ideas when it comes to discipleship. So what we're trying to do is kind of give an idea that is culturally consistent with what's going on today in a church climate. What are we thinking about discipleship? How do we execute being a discipleship advocate, and tools that we want to bring?
This is one of the things that I'm really excited about, is that as we are working, we told you that this is iterative learning. We are learning this, and as we're building this too, we are currently in talks with the elders at Blueprint Church. A lot of this stuff that we're putting online on the city syllabus are things that we've been doing for years, but we are talking about coming into partnership with Blueprint, that these will, the city syllabus will be actually a tool that they're utilizing on a consistent basis. So this is not going to be theory and all of that, but when we talk about creating a tool to come alongside leaders, Christian leaders, to make disciples where they live, work, and worship, these are practitioner driven. And so again, we talk about this is a part of the iteration. I just got to admit, this first one that we're talking about, culture versus code, it's kind of triggering for me. Not deep triggering, but if you guys remember, I tell people all the time that my call to ministry wasn't a call so I can preach, but it was a call to make disciples. That was the very thing. And there's a whole big story around that. It's just when I learned not to be about anti-vision, but vision, that God was calling us to make disciples, I was like, oh, finally. I'm all in, because when I became a Christian, being a Christian was don't go to the club, don't drink, don't join a fraternity or sorority. I became a Christian in college. Don't. And I was like, I'm clear on what not to do. Can someone tell me what actually to do? And so I went all in. And as you guys know, when I go in to something, I go all in. And early on, as a student, leading a ministry at the University of North Texas campus, many people used to say, Plumline, or that's a cult. Right. Because we were so serious about our faith. Yeah. Right. And so when we think about, and you get serious about this idea of culture of discipleship, some people feel man, if you are serious, then you are cultic. right? And it's interesting that the word coat is in culture, because he used to always say, coat, nah, just family. Right, that was the thing that we just talked about. We were family, right? And so, like, how does this idea, this myth of culture versus code, impact? And you were there early on in some of those days of Plumline.
Yeah, there was a lot of people that it was confusing. It was something new, and so the only framework they had was it's strange, and so the only framework for strange is cult. Like I feel like that's kind of how the progression went. This is too much. You're doing too much. It doesn't take all of that. That's fanatical. And really it was just like, hey, we're just learning our Bible together. We're just learning how to do finances. We're learning holistic, how to be the best woman we can be. I want to look more like Christ next year than I did this year. And how can I do that? I need other people to help me do that. And some of those things amazing. That, some of the things that you're talking about, is when the rubber meets the road in terms of accountability, right? Yeah. Because just like working out, we know that, you heard the term no pain, no gain, right? But so if I was like, hey, Kenny, man, what you just did and, and how you approached so-and-so was not like Christ-like. And, and if I was to be accountable, people were like, whoa. You're all in my business.
You're my business. Right. This is too much. Right. And that's really when it's just like, man, is this a code? Like, so the idea of accountability to because it's easy for me to say, I want to, I want to grow. I want to be like Christ next year. I want to be a better steward. But then when you see him just like making it rain, every week as a college student, he's like, hey, do you think that's a good stewardship of God's resources? Then it's like, oh man, you're doing too much. Well, and then it's like, now it's like, oh, this is a code. They tell you what to do with your money. And you're just like, no, it's called accountability.
I agree, man. And I think also when we think about a Christian faith that encompasses all of life, even today, I think it's more relevant because we tend to compartmentalize what our Christianity should look like. And we talk about where we live, where we work, and where we worship. Well, where we worship, our Christianity should be satirized. That's inside the church. And it may trickle into where we live, but where we work, absolutely not. So we're talking about an all-encompassing, and anything that encompasses all of your life can't get the idea, hold on, this is cultish. Should this encompass all of your life? But of course, we think that it should. Christianity and Christ should encompass everything we do.
One of the things that we've done on the city syllabus is, what we've been doing for years is that we've been doing with church planters. And with our church planters, we explicitly says we are trying to help you to develop and defend a disciple-making culture. Yeah. Because oftentimes when people talk about the disciple making culture. And I've asked pastors and leaders oftentimes, it's like, so you're about discipleship. Yeah. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? And then there was this like, well, what I do is I get once a week at a local Starbucks or a coffee shop, and I get whatever the most famous book is at the time. And we walk through and we talk back and forth about that. And I was like, so that's your whole plan for all disciples? Like that's your whole discipleship strategy? That's your whole plan? And, and so we all talk about that, but we talk about kind of like one-on-one, one-on-three, or even one-on-12, but we're not talking about how do we develop a culture of discipleship. And it really convicted me because I remember my wife and I were married, we have 6 kids. And if I were to say, hey, you guys, man, I discipled 3 out of my 6 kids. Would any of you be impressed with me? It was like, man, that's 3 out of my 6. What if I said 4 out of my 6? Even if I said 5 out of the 6, no one would be like, oh man, that's great.
Yeah, we're playing baseball. That's great numbers.
That's great numbers in this baseball. And I would even say, man, have you ever discipled 6 kids? 6 children? That's a lot. I'm batting over 80%. But we know that the only acceptable answer is 6 out of 6. Yeah. See, but if the church really is not like family, but it really is family, indeed, why are we comfortable with saying 50% of our members are being discipled, 60% of our members are being discipled? And the question becomes is how do we build a culture where everybody who is a covenant member has the opportunity and we're trying to make disciples?
But I think also the question is what is discipleship? And so I think it's imperative that we're touching on this topic first before we move over, because I think a lot of the things we're going to be talking about are things that people in churches actually feel is discipleship, right? I also see the things that you like coming through college ministry, you oftentimes are basically engrafted into this concept of disciple making. So
Yeah, that's a
disciple
good
making is
point.
not
Great
strange. It's but how you make disciples could be manipulated. So it can become very cultish. And in some of these other things on here, it can be just an idea of one-on-one. It can be something that's only a Bible study. But I find that
Great point.
if you're thinking about cultish, it also leans to the next point. Oftentimes when you look at cults, there's usually one person who reigns over all the people.
Yeah.
And that person has all the authority. And so the culture of discipleship has been, even within churches, that type of model. It's just the pastor is teaching, the pastor equips and trains everybody. And that's probably usually just do a Sunday or a Wednesday. Wow. And so people don't think, oh no, there's more to discipleship than that. But in college ministries, they usually swing the pendulum of maybe too much.
Wow.
So anyway,
That's beautiful, man.
yeah, I think,
And I think that to me is the question, though. That what he just said, and by the way, it looks like we're just going to be doing one of these at a time.
No,
At
we
least
can
this
move
first
on.
one. But no, but I think that
I made that suggestion, but I'm gonna be
what's important. What's important about what he said, and I think it's critical to even this first part of this conversation about culture versus code, that it swings to the pendulum when disciple making becomes too much. That wherever you think it's too much is when you start thinking that it's cultage.
Yeah.
And that's where people begin to delineate the difference between what's too much and what's not enough. Like, and and is it like, can I be in your business too much?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that like, is there a line?
no, so the only reason why I say
understand
that some ministries, because of some of the other models that I've come through or have seen. So there are particular ministries that are very cultish. It's like, you have to wash my clothes, you have to do these things, and that they've been kicked off college campuses because of the very cultish model. And then there's some, ministries that we respect and admire that have some philosophies that we would disagree strongly, like it's only one-on-one, or that, and once I disciple you, the job is for you to disciple others, and that's the only model. It's not that that's a false model, because we believe in that. We believe in one-on-one discipleship. But when we believe that's the only form of discipleship, it's like, hold up, this is incomplete. To a point that you often bring up, and that is, I think, maybe in Master Plan of Evangelism as well, is just the idea that Jesus is the only person who operates in the completeness of the gifts.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think this is why whenever we talk about something like discipleship, we have to begin with the foundation of the Bible. And when we talk about Ephesians, every member, every joint supplying, where there's no, obviously you have those who have the ministry gifts, and so they kind of equip the saints, men back, but you do see a model of each member bringing something to the table, where it's not like the cult model of one supreme person who's dictating everything. So obviously discipleship has a biblical framework to it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if you take on that mindset, if I were to disciple my children solely, and Hadi didn't show up at all, or nobody else in our church showed up at all,
Wow.
they would be amazing in some areas, right? But they would be lacking in so many areas.
Indeed.
And so I think that there's that idea of that one-on-one is so limited.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
It's just, and I guess I'm just stuck on this idea of how far is too far, and where is that line, right? Because we're talking about culture versus code.
Yeah.
Because anytime you have culture is about creating norms.
Yeah.
Right. And whenever you create norms, then that is like, it's a normal thing, because it's like when I say, like, if I were to say I'm hurt, I'm lonely, I'm sad, you guys would know what I'm talking about, right? Because we've developed culture here. And so like, there are going to be patterns and practices that you do, because that's the very essence of creating culture. So I guess part of this is like, how do we know where that line is between culture and code? Is it when, kind of to Show's point, when is this like, it's this way as the only way? Is that when we're doing it? Or is this as the suggested way? Or,
I think Show's point was really good a second ago, where he said, Christ is the only one who walked earth with all the fullness of the gifts. And as humans, we're so limited.
Right.
So if you go into it thinking that my way is the way,
Right.
I'm so blinded myself of what that could be.
Right.
And so you have to have other people around, and otherwise I do think that's cultish, because when I hear people say things like, that's my disciple,
Right.
I'm like, that's red flag in my heart, because I'm like, no, that's Jesus's disciple, and hopefully that's all of our postures, that we're trying to get them to follow me as I follow the Lord. Don't just follow me, because I'm going to lead you off the, the
Yeah.
wrong
Absolutely.
Y'all, one thing that I when you were saying like how far is too far, I think part of Christian growth and growth in discipleship is you talk about invitation, and you invite people to deeper levels of intimacy. And there are going to be times part of growth is saying, hold up, that's too much.
Yeah.
But because of life and sometimes situations, it may be the fact that something happens, and so you meet a certain need in somebody, and they're willing to come a little further. So I think, when it comes to discipleship and is it too much, I mean, ultimately Jesus called his followers to come live with me and be homeless with me, and let's just so ultimately we're inviting people in more and more to more intimacy, and that's growth, and that's creating culture to me.
I don't think it's a problem of intimacy and proximity. Like, I think you should be as intimate and as close and proximate to a person as possible. You should know their business. You should know how they operate. I think the problem when it comes to being possessive and manipulative,
That's
and those are the things that I've seen people do, is like, no, this is mine, to Angie's point.
Yeah.
You don't have the approval to go to anybody else
Yeah.
for any kind of guidance and wisdom.
Yeah.
And when you do, you get chastised for that.
Yeah.
And that can become very manipulative behavior. And I think you see that in churches. And also when the discipler feels like they have nothing to learn.
Right.
Like, to
Right.
point, Jesus is the only one who
Yeah.
didn't need to learn anything from anybody. And so I think that's where it gets to a point where it becomes cultish.
Yeah, that's good show, because but the reality of, we live in a world where most people come in with kind of like a skeptical mindset of why do these people want, like, why do you want me at your house, or why do you want me to, you know what I mean? So just
Oh, no, that's gonna be weird. The Howdy and them was they
hey, you want me to come to your house?
They had a
or what?
program called Sims,
I know.
and
they've
had people live with them since 2004 or 2000.
Yeah.
And I never thought it was strange because I knew them. I was like, well, I know them, I trust them. But everybody else and their mama was like, this is what they doing
They
over
said
there?
it was a cult, and that's
Yeah,
kind of
they
right.
did.
That's my point. And people said it's too far. You're doing too much.
But those are also people who didn't. So yes, it's going to be cultish to people who I think don't understand the Book of Acts, who look outside and say this is strange behavior. But and to some degree, I think that's part of parcel of that's just the call of the Christian. We look strange. We're peculiar people. But for those people who understand, who come to the other side of it, I think then you guys created a culture where other folks start inviting people in their houses, and it was just normal. And I remember it being like, oh, Blueprint, y'all the folks who have all those folks live with y'all.
and that's my point about understanding Christianity. I think growth is understanding Christianity from what this culture presents as Christianity. Oftentimes, even a church culture of me just coming into the church. Hey, it's about coming on Sunday, and I'm affirmed for that, to the point where I grow in intimacy with others, and even share house, share food, share all that stuff together.
And that, to me, is my point, because of what you're saying. You guys are saying it is something. For many years we were called a cult.
So
Like
you just
said,
you,
so we
you got
were-
some trauma there.
No. That's why I started off.
It
I
was
started
real,
off
though,
saying
yeah.
that I have
You started this
trauma
thing off
around it,
saying like, look,
because I think that we're
It's a therapy
giving
session.
a little bit too much. Because even today, when I tell people that 18 out of the 22 years that Angie and I have been married, we've had someone live with us, and it's like, oh, that's a lot. Are we still to this day get looks? We still get like that dynamic. And so I think that, especially in the day where we're making Christianity more convenient, or you need to do
There you
to
go.
call people
There
to
you go.
something that is
That's why I said,
deeper,
yeah.
harder, more
Uncomfortable.
uncomfortable,
Yeah.
is definitely not something that's norm. But even to your point, Cheryl, I think is really important, is that earlier these years that people said that, but then later on people just like, it became a norm at
Right.
Blueprint, and that's the definition of culture.
Right.
Even though you can go and you can track, there's not one sermon in the 20 plus years that I've been doing ministry that I ever said that in order to make disciples, you got to ask people to live in your home.
Yeah.
I've never had any sermon around that, but that is the culture, that we built,
Indeed.
right? And that culture was calling people to call us a cult.
Yeah.
Right. And so like this concept of disciple making, and why I even want to develop tools, for church leaders and Christian leaders, is like, how do we help them to develop like a culture of disciple making? But I believe this, knowing that, I would rather warn people to say, people are going to probably consider that you're in a cult, like, because if you have these tools, or if you have a plan, or if you like, that's kind of where I guess part of where I'm just saying, like, the culture versus cult. So yes, I am. Yes, I am. I have some trauma around it. I'm working through it, and I'm using you guys as my therapy session. But however,
I think in our Airbnb culture today, it's not as strange though.
Well, I think it even
Does that
more
make sense?
My thought is that it's even more, because my mind was spinning like, man, it was a different time of church. Like you said, the win now is get people in the seats.
That is so true.
And we can't, it's a struggle now for a lot of churches, particularly the African American churches, to get people to come to church. And so you think about going beyond that, get you to now come and be a part of a whole thing that has you in my home and stuff. I think it's even more challenging today. So just my thoughts.
Especially in places like in the city,
Yeah.
right, where we don't have a lot of space or whatever. Like, I literally, like, people don't, the part that people don't understand is, like, up until like 6 or 7 years ago, we never had a home that had room for other people. We literally had all of our boys. We have 3 kids, 3 boys and 3 girls, 6 kids, but we have 3 kids in one room, 3 girls in one room our whole life. And we told them that we're never going to allow you to have your own room, because we were so committed to this. So it wasn't just a convenient thing. It wasn't just we just had houses. And so I constantly hear people that are just like, it's a convenience. No, we disciplined ourselves in order to create this culture. And I think that, the culture that I see in 2 Timothy chapter 2, when Paul says, hey, and the things you heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, that same commit to faithful men who will be able to teach others also, that Paul is talking to Timothy about establishing culture. And then he goes on to say, you got to be single-minded like a soldier. You need to be disciplined like an athlete. You need to persevere like a farmer. Like, he's not just saying, like, by chance, develop this culture. He says you got to be vigilant, because I really believe, like, pastors and leaders are just like parents, right? It is one of the most unrewarding, things. It's like you're pouring into someone, and you don't see that immediate growth. Like, a lot of times, even with your children, you don't see them kind of growing, or, like, let's just say physically growing, but people will come and they see DJ now, and they saw, the last time they saw him was like 2 months ago. It's like, man, you've grown. But for someone that's constantly there with them, you don't notice it, and you don't kind of like, oh. And that's the same way with discipleship. And so that's the reason why we get more excited about numbers, how many people, how many clicks, how many that, because disciple making is not, you can measure. Disciple making is not something.
Can I ask you a question? And this probably will be the last question. What would you tell? So because I'm thinking of it as people who kind of discovered disciple making in college ministry versus people who discovered it in churches. What would you tell the person who comes from a discipleship making culture in college, and how to integrate it in a church versus someone who's in a church who needs to adapt more to a, vice versa?
Well, I like to use, like, the grid, principle, prudence, and practices. Sometimes I use the preferences at the end, but principle, prudence, and practices. What that means is, what are the biblical principles? They said Jesus was with them. So we know that one of the things about disciple making is life on life. So the question that you have to wrestle with is, how do I get life on life with those people that I'm connected with? And for Angie and I, we just said the best tool that we have is our house. So we have people live with us, but it may not be the house. So then you have to wrestle with, how do I flesh out this principle? And then the prudence now comes is like, okay, how is other mature believers and other believers wrestle with this principle? And what is some wisdom that I can get? And then I can find out my season of life, stage of life, and then try to apply it. So because what we determined is, like, when we had all teenagers, it was harder and harder for us to be able to do that in the way we had AAU games, and we were traveling, and it was just a hard season to try to to do all of that. So we had to rethink of what life on life was like. And so I would just say principle, prudence, and practices. Like, in practices is kind of a replacement for preferences. Like, how do you apply that? We've never died on the heel of you got to use your house. That's a preference. That's a practice that you, Angie, and I did, but it was never a thing. So that was never a thing that we was mandating. And so that's what I would say to any of you that want to develop a culture of disciple making in your home. Is you first got to understand the principles, and then you can move to like finding other people that have done it, prudence, wisdom, and then how can you practice some of your personal preferences in terms of practice? What works for you? That's excellent. So
Good.
I think that's it. Like we said, we got one. There we have 8 of them.
That was 2. There was one-on-one was in there as well.
But I got a lot to say about the one-on-one in the church.
All right.
But so we just go with this. This is the culture versus cult.
Thank you for listening to My Boulevard's Integrate podcast. Be sure to visit us online at myboulevard.co, that's myboulevard.co, or follow us on social media to stay updated on all things My Boulevard.